Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's Tina. And today we are wrapping up the 11 books that I finished in February. Now, February was a pretty good reading month overall. I had some wins. Actually, I had quite a few 5-star reads, but I also had some misses. I would say none of these are inherently bad books. They're probably just books that I wouldn't recommend overall. All right, I'm going to rank these from least favorite to most favorite. And starting off is The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley. And this book is fine. It is not a bad book. I thought that I would dislike it more than I actually did because I didn't really dislike it. It just wasn't that good overall. It is a mystery thriller book, obviously. And this one is set in the manor, and the manor is sort of this wellness retreat for the elite. This is set in England, and what I do like about it is that it's very much a eat the rich type of book because this manor is set in a remote countryside in England. A lot of the locals are pissed because they're not hiring them, they're outsourcing things, and so there's a lot of disdain between the people that live on this land and then the people that are, visiting there. And I do like the main character. The main character was pretty interesting. Her name was Francesca, and she was just somebody that I just had this anger simmering beneath her, and she made me laugh quite a bit. Where it lost me is that it's quite convoluted. Leading up to it, it's got short chapters. I was interested. It kept me going. It kept me reading a lot of back and forth point of view. But then the end, my God, there were just so many twists and turns and this and then this and then this. It was sort of unbelievable by the end. It was fine, forgettable, middle of the road. We did this for book club, and some people really hated this book and gave it 1 star. I didn't hate it that much. I just thought, you know what, probably not for me. Certainly not on the best mystery and thriller of the year for me. I'm going to give this one 3 stars. All right, next up is Our Winter Monster, and this one is a horror novel. I enjoyed aspects of it. It is about this couple that are fighting. They're sort of not getting on, and they are taking a trip. They decide to go on a lover's getaway in a cabin in the remote woods. And while they're on the way there, there is a snowstorm, predictably, and they get caught in it. I would call this almost supernatural horror. It is a creature feature, and those don't always land super well with me. What I liked about this was the tension between the couple, because at some point their car crashes and they get separated, and they each find these different things in the woods. I liked the originality of this. It surprised me in a lot of ways. I definitely wasn't predicting where it was going. And I also like some of the small town characters because it is at points set in a diner, and you see that the detective is, talking to one of the waiters in here. It's graphic, it's brutal, it is horror, and it was mildly entertaining. It's also pretty short. I would say, though, not something that's going to necessarily stick with me long term. It was good for this time of year. It's like a winter horror novel, and I think I would skip it. I also gave this one 3 stars. Next is the novel that I picked up for my video on picking a book based solely on their opening sentence. And this one did have a good opening sentence, and I think it set up the book well. It says, "How we slice the skin carefully, that's a given." Because this book takes place in a taxidermy shop, and that's the dead things, right? It really, though, is a book about grief, and it's a book about family. Because at the start of it, you've got Jessalyn, who goes to her family's taxidermy shop and finds that her dad had completed suicide in the taxidermy shop. And so she is sort of forced to deal with not only the family business and all the problems that he was facing, she's also dealing with grief. Now, the book takes place about a year or so later. She is trying to manage, but she's not doing great. She's really struggling throughout this novel. She does have a brother who is grieving for reasons of his own. And this is in the synopsis, that you come to find out that his wife is the only person that Jessa has been in love with, and Bryn has left both of them. So it's messy, needless to say. It's a messy queer book, and that I actually really did like. If you are at all queasy about animal cruelty, don't read this. There's a lot of aspects of just dead animals in this. Obviously, it's on the cover. I should have known that going in, right? But it was surprising to me some of the things that happened. Their mom plays a big role in this book too, and I appreciated that we got to see her process her grief and to really come into herself after the loss of her husband. She has a very interesting new hobby in which she takes taxidermy and puts them in very sexual positions, but I think the author did a good job fleshing out why that is and why she decided to take on this passion project. I enjoyed the ending. This one, I don't know. I don't know if I recommend it. I think maybe the right reader would enjoy it if you like messy, queer family stories that are a little bit slow, a little bit sad, but ultimately have a good resolution. This one could work for you. I'm giving it 3.5 stars. Next is Lone Women by Victor LaValle, and that book was good. It is another horror novel. This one is historical horror, and it's about a woman who decides to leave her family's town on the West Coast. I think it's like in California, and make her way over to Montana. This one is historical fiction, and it takes place during the late 1800s at a time where women and people, homesteaders, were literally, if they could live on the land in Montana for a year, they were able to keep it. And she makes her way there, and she has something very interesting with her. She has a trunk full of secrets that she took from her home, and she is traveling with it to Montana. I liked the historical fiction aspects of it more than I enjoyed the horror aspects of it. I was happy to report that you do find out what's in the trunk, and I think that was very unique. For me, this was just a kind of a middle of the road. I didn't love it. I didn't find myself rushing to pick it up. Each time I had to put it down. I overall am going to land with 3.5 stars for this one, but I definitely want to read Victor LaValle again and give him another shot. Then I read The Crash by Frida McFadden, and I enjoyed it. The Crash is about a woman, Tegan, who decides to drive to her brother's house in the mountains in the middle of a snowstorm, and Tegan, I think, is something like 8 months pregnant. And she crashes her car. A lot of car crashes this month, but she crashes her car, and this man finds her. He is a, I think, plow driver or tow truck driver, what have you, and he sort of rescues her, and he's like, hey, the roads are pretty bad right now. Let's take you back to my house where my wife can nurse you back to health. She's a nurse herself. And so Tegan agrees, and when she gets there, she finds that things are not as they seem, right? This one is Frida McFadden's take on misery. I enjoyed some aspects of it. The characters were not so superficial. I mean, there was some depth to both of them, and I enjoyed figuring out what was going to happen to Tegan. I had a good time reading this. Not my favorite book overall, but I think it passed the time really well. This one's a good one for a reading slump, and I gave it 4 stars. Then you've got The Lamb by Lucy Rose, and let me tell you, this is one of those books where I closed and I said, you know what, hell yeah, this one is straight up horror. It's actually cannibalistic horror, so know that going in. It is gruesome, and this is another one that I picked up for our first sentence video/episode, because the first sentence is incredible. It says, on my 4th birthday, I plucked 6 severed fingers from the shower drain, and I was frankly hooked. I had to know what was going to happen. And this is about Margot and her mother. I would call this a motherhood story, a very, very, very complicated, twisted mother-daughter story. The antagonist in this one, the mom, was so evil, and I was just captivated. It's sort of a queer folktale, and it is contemporary. I think it's set in present day, but the mom and Margot are living in the woods together in this cabin, and they take in what they call strays. Strays are people that are wandering in the woods that they convince to go back to their house with them, and then they eat them when they're there. Literally, they're cannibals. One day Eve comes to the door, and Eve is not like the others. Eve and her mother sort of have a entanglement with each other. It leaves Margot wondering her place in this family home. Very visceral writing, very disgusting writing, but also there were some aspects of it that I was like, yeah, I get it. Honestly, the mom, again, was a terrible person, but I understood some of the things she was saying about motherhood. This one made me feel like a fantastic mom, and I really recommend this. This is Lucy Rose's debut novel, and I'm definitely going to read her again. Then you've got Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor, and I've taken the book jacket off because I liked the teal spine better. It worked better on my rainbow shelves, but Death of the Author is a book that I definitely recommend. This one is interesting. It's also it's a bit long, and I sort of felt the length with it, but what it's about is Zelu, and Zelu is this character that is somebody you will either love or hate, but she is very much her own person throughout this novel. And Zelu is an adjunct professor. She's also a person that's disabled, and she is Nigerian. And these are identities that she works through a lot within this novel. But more than anything, the identity that she is chasing is that of an author. She has been working on her stories for a really long time, wants to be an author, much to the chagrin of her family, who is full of lawyers and doctors. But she ultimately writes this book when she's at her lowest, and the book goes viral. Literally, she is now a millionaire. There's adaptations, and this book unpacks what it is like to have your work read by others, and to have so many people have so many eyes on you, and to have their pressure and their, perception of who you should be on you. This is also a little bit science fiction because the Zelu is a science fiction author. So as you're reading, you get these chapters that are chapters from the book that she's writing. And the author does this really cool thing where you can see which chapters are written, the book within a book by the little robots, because the story itself is called Rusted Robots. That is the trilogy that she's writing throughout. So you're coming to read her science fiction novel, but you're also very much centered in the world that Zelu is inhabiting. It's also an interesting structure because you are not reading it straight. It's not like Zelu talking to, the page or whatever. You're hearing about Zelu from those around her, including her sisters, someone she had a relationship with, and people like that. I thought it was a really interesting structure. This book does a lot of cool things, and I'm going to read this author again. She has a lot of books, a lot of adult books, young adult, even some children's books, and I think she's best known in science fiction. So if I pick her up again, I'm going to try something that's a little more science fiction heavy. For me, this was contemporary fiction with a tiny bit of science fiction mixed in, but that worked perfectly fine for me. I'm going to give this one 4.25 stars. Now we're coming up on some that I really love. We've got Middle of the Night by Riley Sager, and I'm so happy to report that this is high up on my list. As you know, I was questioning whether or not I should continue to read Sager. This one really, really worked for me. This is a mystery/thriller. I would not call it a thriller though. I call this more suspenseful because it is about the main character, whose name I've forgotten. Ethan is the main character, and Ethan is a man, I think he's in his 40s, and he's still sort of dealing with the grief of having lost his best friend Billy when they were kids. And what happened was they were camping in Ethan's backyard, and somebody broke into the camp, broke into their tent and stole Billy, and he was never seen again. The book takes place 30 years later when Ethan is now back in the family home, back on the cul-de-sac where it all happened, and some of the people that were around back then are still here. And that is great. Ethan is starting to lose it a little bit. Just the fact that he is in this house where everything happened. He has not resolved his feelings about this in the past 30 years. And so I would almost call this a grief novel as well, because the main character is really still spiraling. What worked for me is that it's also domestic suspense. So you're getting to know the neighbors. You're like wondering, okay, this person was friends with who, and how does he know the mother? There's some just cool aspects. There's something that's in the woods. That's like the institute back there. And you're wondering how that will play. I had a really good time with this one. If you want something that's super fast paced, this won't be it. But if you like something that's a little bit more, slower paced, more thoughtful, and will keep you on your toes, I recommend this. I gave this 4.5 stars. All right, the next 3 are all 5-star reads for me. I'm not somebody with 5 stars that's overly stingy, but I think last year was the lowest number of 5 stars I've ever had. So I'm pretty excited that I've got 3 in this video. First is He, She, They. And this is by Schuler Baylor, and this is a nonfiction book. Wow, am I loving this? I was recommended this book after I finished Mad Honey by Jennifer Finney Boylan and Jodi Picoult, and this book does so much. Schuler is an activist, and he speaks out a lot about being transgender and his experiences, but he, at his heart, is a trans man himself. And so he talks a lot about, just definitions. He talks about his experience and just a firsthand account of what it is to be transgender. I really appreciated how vulnerable this author is and how he literally gives you, as people existing in this world who want to learn more, questions that you should not ask, and things that you should say, like if you're interested in somebody's pronouns, or what happens if you make a mistake, how do you handle that? And it's broken up into 4 different parts: Gender and Me, which is more autobiographical; Gender and Others; Gender and Society; and Gender and You, and it ends with a little bit of allyship. I think this book is good for anybody, honestly. I think some might find it to be a bit didactic, meaning it's like explaining things to you, but I really appreciated having some of these things spelled out, because I think I sort of understood them in the ephemeral. I really understand legislation and all what that meant. I'm really thankful for this. This is a library copy, but I want a physical copy because I just want to keep it as a resource, as somebody who works with the public a lot, and I want to make sure that I'm doing my best to really have and foster this type of understanding. Highly recommend, 5 stars. I also did the audio, really good on audio as well. I kept pausing to write things down, and I'm glad this book exists. Next is Good Dirt by Charmaine Wilkerson, and I loved this novel. I really did. It Okay, it's about a jar, right? And at first I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be interested in a family heirloom for 354 pages. I just don't know if I have it in me. Boy, was I wrong. I picked this up, and really it's about this family named the Freemans that are a prominent Black family that are living in New England. And it's about their history in present day. And they're people that came to New England as one of the first Black families in this area ever, and how that came to be and the significance of this jar. This book is propulsive too. Honestly, within like the first, I don't know, maybe 20 pages, you've had a wedding, you had a wedding that would have been, you have somebody that dies, and you have her now going to Paris, her being Evie. The entire story sort of centers on Evie. She is the main character, but you also hear from her parents and other people in her life. And she was set to marry this really well-off New England man who was a white man, and their wedding ended the day of the wedding. And so the book unpacks, like, one, what happened to make this wedding not go on, and two, what happened to her brother so many years ago because somebody broke into their home and shot him when he was 14 years old. And gosh, this book is so good. It made me feel. I cried a little bit in this book, and I love books that, this is historical fiction, I would say, although part of it is set in present day, it still feels historical. I love that books are able to give us a picture of, in this case, American history without it feeling dry. It really brings people to life. I loved this book. I'm trying to think of what else I should say. I think this one would be really good for book club. We're going to discuss this for our Book Talk, etc. book club this coming week, and I'm excited to see what everybody else has to say. But if the premise doesn't sound that exciting to you, that's okay. Pick it up. I did the audio. January Lavoie narrates, which, you know, she is one of my favorite narrators, and I think there's going to be so much for any book club to discuss. There's a lot of ethical questions, and there's just so much that Charmaine Wilkerson did. I did read her novel Black Cake. I really liked that as well, but I liked this one even more. I gave this 5 stars. Finally, my favorite book for February is Red Clay, and I do not have a copy of it, sadly, but I'm going to need to get one. Red Clay is a novel that takes place just after the Civil War, as we're in Reconstruction era, and the premise for this one is what made me pick it up. You have this man who is in his 80s who has passed away. He's a Black man, and he is surrounded by his friends and family, and then a white woman comes to his funeral, and she's an elderly woman, and the family's kind of like, who's this lady? How do they know our grandpa, right? And so she approaches the family and says, a lifetime ago, my family used to own yours. And literally her family used to own Felix, who is the main character who is now deceased. But what I love about this is truer historical fiction. The majority of this is spent during that Reconstruction era in the South, in Red Clay, Alabama. And you are finding out what it was like for individuals that lived during that time period. You're finding out what it was like for people who, all of a sudden, yeah, you're free. Yeah, right. There were so many people that did not want that to happen, so many white people, and it talks about what being like a well-meaning white person looked like and how easy it was for some people to get caught up with the Klan and other organizations that do not want equality. But this book also, I think, could have very easily gotten to be emotionally manipulative or too brutal. Don't get me wrong, there's slavery and some horrible, messed up things happen, but also ultimately you know that Felix perseveres because you just saw him die when he was 80 years old. So I loved following this character and seeing what events took place to lead him to, passing away as an old man. I loved this book. Criminally underrated. So if you like historical fiction, or if you're at all curious about this, I definitely think you should pick it up. I keep saying this, but I'm comping it to James by Percival Everett and The Sweetness of Water by Nathan Hale. Those are perfect comps to this one. Loved it. And I gave it 5 stars. So that is it for me for February. It was a very good reading month. I always say that February is my worst reading month of the year, most years, and most of the time that's true. This year I pushed through and kept it going. I'm a little concerned because I've already finished 27 books this year and we are only 2 months in, so who knows what my final number is going to be. But I'm going to ride the wave. I keep saying that 2024 was a flop for books, for new releases specifically, but 2025 is shaping up to be so good. I can't wait for March. There are so many books that I want to read, so many so, and I'm so motivated for books in March that are coming out. I might even do a March TBR and see if I can stick to that, so stay tuned and see if I end up doing that. But overall, thank you so much for being here. I love making these videos, and if you enjoyed watching, please like, please subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! You have this man. what was his name? Fuck, I forgot.